What's up, team? This is Frank, Red 6 standing by, and this is a quick and dirty review of House of the Dying Sun. So the Emperor is dead, the royal guard has been scattered, and a false king sits upon the throne. Execute the Emperor's final edict, hunt the traitor lord, and bring ruin to their people. That's the story in House of the Dying Sun. Then the game thrusts you immediately into the first level, which has you check all your systems and controls in an authentic way. Only the game was optimized for gamepads, and if you went to all the trouble of buying this game for VR, then you're going to want to use a hands-on throttle and stick. There's just no better way to play a flight sim game. Unfortunately, button controls for your flight stick turns out to be the real first level in the game, as the sheer number of controls in this game is pretty overwhelming at the start. Also, whenever you try to bind a new key, the game forces you to zero all sticks and axes, and then press any button. I mean, I've never played a game that made me press a button before I could bind the key that I want, and I don't know that I like it. Also, the game doesn't allow you to bind combinations of buttons, only single button commands are allowed, which really limits what you can do with the HOTAS. But whatever, you get the controls in a playable state and you're itching to fly. The game can actually be played in two distinct modes. This is the tactical overview, and it allows you to command your fleet's movements and attacks from this overseer position. You can actually play the game like this by allowing the AI to sort out the battles, and it's pretty cool to move your perspective around and scope out the ships as they fight. I found using the tactical overview with the HOTAS almost unbearable. Instead, I opted for a hybrid model where I flew my ships with the HOTAS and issued orders in tactical mode with the gamepad. See, these controls on screen are all mapped for the gamepad, so I was never confused as to which button did what. Also, the game pauses when you enter tactical overview, which gives you ample time to pick up your controller and start commanding. Thus, I wedged my controller in my waistband as I played, which afforded me an unexpected benefit. You see, the controllers will rumble when you get hit, which really adds to the, immersion. The game features a tutorial and 14 missions with various levels of difficulty. Don't imagine that you'll just play this game on normal off the bat. No, the game will warn you that you'll probably have to come back later once you've unlocked the larger fleet. After completing certain missions, you're rewarded with new armaments and fleet members. Although you can't directly control anything other than your interceptor, having excess fighters, frigates, and destroyers really helps as they add much needed firepower and cannon fodder. And if you die with an interceptor, the game lets you assume control of another in your fleet. My first run through on easy took me about 4 hours to complete, but then I wanted to replay the game on Warlord, Harbinger, and Dragon, which forces me to play with mere interceptors, and I'm still trying to figure out how to beat each mission like that, especially since all the levels have bonus and main objectives to complete. And if you do manage to beat Dragon difficulty, you can also try challenge mode, which has a leaderboard and sends never-ending waves of enemies after you until you die. To assist me with the more difficult levels, I had to manage field upgrades that can be purchased with the points you get from completing missions. There were a few times I got stuck and couldn't progress without mixing and matching some of these upgrades. For example, the Kamikaze upgrade not only causes massive damage from your ship's impact, but also adds damage from all the heavy weapon ammo that you have on board, which allows you to kill the flagship in one hit. Also, the gap drive allows your interceptors to warp short distances around the operation zone, allowing my fighters to blink around and destroy key objectives, disrupt shields so that my larger ships could snipe enemies from afar, or in general cause havoc and chaos as the enemies frantically try to target me as I bob and weave around their ships. This upgrade in particular really changed the way I played and renewed my vigor for the game. However, replaying the levels on different difficulties does its best to cover up that the core game is rather short. Like I said, I beat easy mode in 4 hours and then beat Warlord and Harbinger in about 6 hours, mostly because I had memorized the strategies for a few of the missions that were available. The game tries to reward you for completing the game over and over by offering 7 ending dialogues, but I found them rather confusing and wasn't really invested in the story anyways. And that's it. That's everything you need to know about House of the Dying Sun. In the end, when comparing the game between standard monitor and VR, there's really no contest. VR wins. Being able to intuitively look around the entire canopy of my cockpit to track enemies, missiles, and objectives is just too good. I was really enthralled and immersed while playing the game and experienced some genuinely frantic and intense fights, as well as some split-second decision making which made me feel like a real ace. However, there were a few things that also left me wanting. For example, the sense of scale when you first warp into an operation zone to the minuscule detail of the ships as you observe them in tactical mode was really enjoyable for me. But the strategic advantage of using the tactical overview is pretty essential later on, which means that I needed to use my gamepad to control this mode, and that really broke the immersion for me. However, the radio chatter and the sound of oxygen feeding into my helmet and how the weapons are visible on my hull and also display cooldowns directly on them, those were nice touches. Oh, and this small monitor on your instrument panel gives you a super zoomed in picture of your target, which is great for sniping and knowing your enemy's orientation as you try to avoid their fire. But the rest of the ship's interior is literally an unmoving texture. None of these buttons or instruments do anything. Granted that you don't see any of this on the monitor, but it's an unfortunate waste in VR. Also, your radar display is a flat circle which tries its best to display a 3-dimensional world around you. This thing was so useless I never bothered to even look at it. Yet, learning how to use your ship's drift ability to slide into your enemy's blind spot and unlocking new ship loadouts which perfectly match your playstyle can be very rewarding. But I had trouble really customizing my ship due to how the field upgrades work. You see, you can only equip 2 upgrades per ship class, and one of them happens to be shields. Why would I ever unequip shields on my interceptor interceptor which is already made out of wet paper. My destroyers and frigates may have more flexibility since they have so much more HP, but also many of these upgrades are only available for the fighter class ships anyways. Oh, and that reminds me, your flotilla is persistent in that once you unlock, say, 3 destroyers, you will always get 3 destroyers whenever you start a mission, regardless of whether or not they died in any previous missions. However, all your ships gain experience upon killing enemies, and when they die, they lose all this and go back to being a recruit. The game doesn't really explain what kind of buffs are afforded upon reaching higher veterancy levels, but I can only assume that keeping your ships alive and with a higher rank can only benefit you in the end. Oh, and one more thing, the HUD colors are an interesting choice. Here you see green, blue, and yellowish orange. Would you have guessed that green is civilian, blue is the enemy, and mustard is your primary objective? To top things off, your allies are orange proper. Man, I got confused so many times when I returned to this game after a hiatus that I sometimes started attacking my allies. Anyways, if you're looking for a fun but short, objective-based space combat game, House of the Dying Sun will be a blast, especially in VR. If you're looking for something with more substance, longevity, and better graphics, you'll probably want to look elsewhere though.